Super Rugby Pacific. That is the name of the new competition that is going to be replacing Super Rugby Aotearoa, Super Rugby AU here in New Zealand and in Australia. With the old Super Rugby dead, there's kind of been a question mark about what was going to be the competition Aussies and Kiwis would be playing in going forward. And this is the one. We've kind of known for a while that there was going to be a joint competition between the Aussies and Kiwis, plus, in all likelihood, a Fijian team and a Pasifika team. And that's exactly what we've got. So it's 12 teams. As I mentioned, the 5 Aussies, the 5 Kiwis, and those 2 new teams. And the competition name is Super Rugby Pacific. We do have some details about the competition, which we'll go through. And you guys can let me know your thoughts on how this one is going to be looking going forward. It's an exciting bit of news. I guess it's a familiar name. It's an interesting one that they decided to keep Super Rugby. I guess it's that branding. But it's not a Sanzar competition anymore. It is a joint venture between Rugby Australia and New Zealand Rugby. Remember, New Zealand Rugby was initially pushing for very minimal kind of Australian participation in terms of teams, but it is the full 5 teams from each country plus the 2 new teams, although apparently in terms of the licenses are 7-5. So the Drua and the Pacifica side are actually New Zealand Rugby licensed teams, but they're not going to be playing as New Zealand teams. Obviously, they're going to be, I guess, as genuine as it can be in terms of, meeting the goals that they are there to achieve. The schedule itself is going to be a 14-game regular season for each of the teams. You play 7 games at home, you play 7 games away, and you play everybody, which is good news. That kind of keeps it fair. But you do get 3 extra games, which they're kind of still determining how that's going to work out. So you will get 3 extra games, and at least 2 will be from your own kind of rivalry area, I guess. So I'm assuming you will definitely see an extra game between the Drua and the Pacifica, and you will see the likes of the Blues up against, the Crusaders and the Chiefs for at least 2 of them. So if you're Aussie teams, you'll play 2 of those 3 extra games against Aussie teams. If you're New Zealand, it'll be New Zealand teams. I would imagine the Pacifica and Drua go against each other, plus maybe 1 Aussie, 1 Kiwi. Not sure. We'll have to kind of wait for the official draw to come out. The competition is going to run between February and June, so it's kind of end of summer all the way through to the start of winter down here in the Southern Hemisphere. A good news about that fixtures date is it doesn't clash with the July test. It doesn't clash with the July tests. So by the time this competition is done, you'll be able to kind of release all your All Blacks and Wallabies and Fiji players and whatnot, Samoa, Tongan guys to go play for their national teams, assuming they're playing in Super Rugby Pacific. It's going to be a top 8 qualification structure, which is a bit weird given you've only got 12 teams. 8 qualify for the playoffs. Seems like a lot. I feel like 6 would be more appropriate because then at least it's the best half. But 8, top 8 qualify for the playoffs. So you got to be pretty bad to miss out on the playoffs. But playoffs are obviously ones that, knockout games are the ones that attract, I guess, more attention. And I guess in terms of keeping the competition interesting because there's no relegation, so to keep the bottom of the table interesting, I can see why they've done that. Remember the old Super Rugby, when it was only the top 4 teams that made it. You knew halfway through the season, our season's done. We've got nothing to play for. So if nothing else, teams kind of hunting that 8th spot will at least have something to play for. Although they'll probably get smashed because once the playoffs actually go proper, it'll be 1v8. 2v6, 2v7, 3v6, and 4v5. So if you're going to be the 8th qualifier, you're going to be up against the Crusaders or one of the top teams. So it's going to be a pretty hard one. But 8 qualifying teams, as I mentioned, it seems like a lot, but hopefully it keeps the bottom of the log a little more interesting than it usually is. As I mentioned, the draws to be finalised, and there's no conferences. So when I said it's top 8, it's just whoever's the top 8. It's not top Aussie team, top Pacifica team, and top, New Zealand team automatically qualify. Nope. It's just the straight top 8. based on the games you've played. So apparently there was a bit of wrangling between, both sides as to how it was going to work. I think Aussie Rugby were kind of keen on a conference system. They wanted more Aussie to Aussie games, whereas New Zealand Rugby was pretty adamant that it's going to be a straight kind of round robin with a one simple log, because at least for New Zealand fans, the conference system has been a real bugbear, a real kind of point of contention in recent years. So, hopefully it's kind of simple in that regard. Obviously, with there being those extra 3 games, there'll be some games, some teams that get a draw, which is unfortunate. Like whoever has to play the Crusaders twice is going to feel like they drew a short straw compared to some of the other teams, that kind of thing. One interesting other point, which is no way confirmed at this stage, but they haven't ruled out the possibility of a draft. And when I say a draft, I mean like if you've seen American sports, like the young talent who's coming in who hasn't quite made it at the professional level yet. Once they become like 18 or whatever it is, when they're eligible, they get drafted by whatever team. Usually it's the bottom place team from the previous season who gets the first choice. So if there's some young up-and-coming prospect, it's a quarterback or whatever in the NFL, then they get drafted first. I love the drafts, man. I don't know how it could work. Like the reason drafts generally couldn't work in the Super Rugby context is, you've got to be contracted to a New Zealand team. At least from a New Zealand Rugby point of view, you've got to be contracted to a New Zealand team to be eligible for the All Blacks. They like to have feedback on the players and give directions on when they should be playing, fullback, or should they be playing first 5, that kind of thing. So you lose a little bit of that if you had a draft system. But with it being kind of localized to New Zealand, Australia, it could be an interesting one. I'd love to see a draft, man. It kind of levels the playing field. You don't get stacked teams like the Crusaders where they've just got a lot of some of the youngest, best talent. Now they would argue their academy has kind of bred that talent, so it'd be unfair to them to have a draft and they lose that talent. But a lot of young guys go to teams like the Crusaders because they're bloody good, and you want to get that kind of best training possible. But a draft, like I said, kind of evens the playing field, and it makes the bottom of the season interesting as well. When you get to the end of the season, like who's going to be the bottom team, who's going to get that first draft pick to pick this new young first 5 out of whatever school. I don't know. It would be very different with the current academy system to go for a draft, but they haven't ruled it out anyway. It's by no means included, but I would love to see a draft. Just for the drama, the parody and whatnot. And if they could trade players, man, you got next level talking points. But anyway, we'll have to see. I think the Drua are likely going to be based in Queensland if it all goes ahead according to plan because of COVID and Fiji, and the Pasifika team will be based in New Zealand going forward. Sanzar is going to have some slight oversight, but it's mostly New Zealand Rugby and Rugby Australia that is organising this one. I mentioned the draft thing. They did say with a kind of a caveat that was like, as exciting as a possibility, but they have to keep an eye on the strength of the All Blacks, basically. So, I can't see the draft thing going ahead personally, but it'd be nice. But yeah, they wouldn't want to lose that control of those guys funneling through to the All Blacks anyway. So, 2022 Super Rugby Pacific. We'll see what happens when the draw comes out. But I don't know, man. It's a fresh start. It's got a bit more depth to it than Super Rugby Aotearoa, which I think you'll notice from the attendances of the first 2 years kind of lost a little bit of its shine because you just got so few teams to play against, man. Whereas the 12-team competition should be able to keep things kind of fresh enough that it is interesting. But anyway, you guys let me know your thoughts. How do you think this stacks up? Do you think it's pretty fair? Do you see any kind of glaring issues with it? It'll be interesting to see what kind of rosters the Drua and the Pacifica guys can muster up in terms of signing players. But anyway, we will see. You guys let me know your thoughts, and I'll talk to you soon. See you later.